friends. Today we are going to talk about a toxic ex and the breakup text that started it all.
Getting back together. Like, ever.
So we've talked about the open hostilities between the colonists and Britain. We've talked about how the colonists stood up to the British with the Boston Tea Party. We talked about how the British got revenge by passing the Intolerable Acts. We talked about how the colonists decided how they were going to respond in the First Continental Congress and how they decided that they needed to arm themselves and form some militias just in case it ended up coming to a fight, which it did at Lexington and Concord, which is considered the first battle of the Revolutionary War. Even though the colonists were technically at war with the British, they didn't really want to be. Think about when you were a little kid. Maybe you tried to run away from home, and you quickly realized that it wasn't going to work out, and you probably went back because you were hungry. The colonists knew that they relied on England for a lot of things, and they were proud to be British citizens. They didn't necessarily want to break away from England, but they wanted to be treated fairly, and they refused to settle for treatment that was less than they felt they deserved.
I ain't settling for anything less than everything.
In 1775, the colonists met again in the Second Continental Congress, and they drafted what was called an olive branch petition. Olive branches are seen as a sign of peace, and this olive branch petition was addressed to the king, saying that they didn't want to be at war with England. They wanted to still be British citizens, but only if they could be treated fairly. This olive branch petition only served to further anger the king, and instead of offering the colonists more rights, he actually sent more troops into the colonies in order to squash this rebellion. But it was definitely more than a rebellion. The colonists realized at this point that they could no longer make amends and that they had to officially separate from Britain. Thomas Jefferson and other prominent men at the time, including Benjamin Franklin, were chosen to write up a draft of what is today known as the Declaration of Independence. In the Declaration of Independence, the colonists basically break up with Britain and its king. And if you actually read the text, it does read like a very well-written breakup letter. There are 4 main parts to the Declaration of Independence, and we are going to go through each of them so that you can understand how this beautiful document shaped the country that we live in today. The first part of the Declaration of Independence is the preamble. You may be thinking, oh, I know that preamble. We the people, right? That's actually not the same preamble. That preamble is for the Constitution, which is another very, very important document that will come around about 10 years after this. A preamble is basically like your opening paragraph of your traditional 5-paragraph essay that you would write for ELA class. The preamble to the Declaration of Independence was basically an introduction telling the king what they were going to talk about in the rest of the document. Part of the preamble goes like this. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with one another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation.
People don't talk that way anymore.
Beautiful. Huh. No idea what you said.
The phrase dissolving political bands basically just means that they were once united by political ties, and now they are breaking those ties and therefore separating from England. And again, they're going to explain why. This introduction introduction or preamble is giving them a preview about what they are going to talk about in the rest of the document. So now that we have our introduction in the preamble, the second part of the Declaration of Independence is the Declaration of Rights. In this section of the Declaration of Independence, the colonists are saying these are the rights that we have that are given to us by God. You've probably heard this part before. In this section, it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." This section quite clearly states that God has given us the right to live, to be free, and to do what makes us happy.
Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something. Not even me. All right?
Alright.
You got a dream, you got to protect it.
The third part of the Declaration of Independence is the list of grievances. This is where the colonists list all the complaints that they have about the king and the British Parliament. This is the longest part of the Declaration of Independence because the colonists had a lot of complaints. "He is kept among us in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures." This is talking about how the king put extra troops in the colonies when they weren't at war, basically just to spy on them. "For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent." This part is talking about how the Navigation Acts said that the colonists could not trade with anyone but Britain, and how Britain added extra taxes on different items without the consent of the colonists, without giving them a say in the taxes and in the government. "He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people." This is talking about all the havoc that the soldiers have caused by being in the colonies and fighting with the colonists. Every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. This part is saying how they've tried over and over again to appeal to the king and parliament to stop treating them this way, and every time they ask for a little bit of respect, they're only met by repeated injury, as in the Boston Massacre, the Intolerable Acts, Lexington and Concord. Need I say more? There are definitely a lot more complaints. They went full Karen mode in this section of the Declaration, but you get the picture. The fourth and final section of the Declaration of Independence is the resolution. The resolution is like the closing or concluding paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. It basically sums up what they talked about throughout the whole document and tells Britain that we are no longer 13 colonies, but the United States of America. By authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. Once again, this is saying that we are our own country now. We're no longer colonies. We are our own country, the United States of America, and we have nothing to do with you politically anymore.
So he calls me up and he's like, "I still love you." And I'm like, this is exhausting, you know? Like, we're never getting back together. Like, ever.
Now, you know the British king is not the type of ex to just let somebody go.
If I can't have you, no one can.
The people who wrote and signed the Declaration of Independence were definitely taking a huge risk. They were basically committing treason against their country, which was punishable in a variety of ways. Before we talk about the specific ways that the colonists could and sometimes were tortured for signing a piece of parchment, it's time for 7-second trivia. Your question for today is, when was the Declaration of Independence signed? Is it A, June of 1776, B, July of 1776, C, August of 1776, or D, September of 1776? If you chose C, August of 1776, you're correct. Wait, what? July 4th is Independence Day. So this part is a little confusing. The Declaration of Independence was approved on July 2nd, 1776, adopted on July 4th of 1776, but most of the people didn't end up actually signing it until August of 1776. In fact, John Adams was really annoyed that July 4th was considered to be Independence Day rather than July 2nd, and he refused to celebrate July 4th as Independence Day. In a very odd coincidence, he actually ended up also dying on July 4th, many years later. They were committing an act of high treason, and there were a lot of hefty consequences that they would have endured had they been caught. Some of the risks were being tarred and feathered, where they would throw hot tar on you and then throw feathers on you and make you look like a giant chicken. That sounds funny, but it was actually really dangerous because the hot tar would burn your skin. They could also be deported back to England, sent to jail. Some people actually had their homes ransacked and burned, and obviously they could have all been hanged. But as Benjamin Franklin famously said,
"We will now all hang together, or most assuredly we will all hang separately."
they believed that a life without freedom was not really a life. So the next time you're enjoying the fireworks on the 4th of July, remember the men who were willing to make the ultimate sacrifice so that you could enjoy a hot dog at a barbecue.